الشراكة بين المنزل والمدرسة قائمة على التواصل الفعال والإيجابية وليس على الندية أو اللوم. حين يكون أطراف العملية التعليمية علاقتهم قائمة على الشراكة والإيجابية يكونون أكثر وعياً بأدوارهم لتحقيق غايات التعلم.
Parents play an incredibly important role for students' academic success. They are the first ones who teach certain skills, interests. They help them with their transition to school. They help them with their homework. They help them understand the demands and the expectations that schools bring to them and how they can adjust to the school environment. So it's really a multidimensional aspects that parents can support and help their children to be successful academically.
تشير الدراسات التربوية إلى أن كلما كانت العلاقة قوية بين المنزل والمدرسة ظهرت آثار مباشرة وغير مباشرة على التحصيل الأكاديمي للطالب. الآثار المباشرة مثل زيادة التحصيل الأكاديمي، زيادة التقيد بالحضور وبالتالي قلة التسرب وقلة الفاقد التعليمي وزيادة الانخراط في الجامعة ليكون عضواً فعالاً مستقراً نفسياً واجتماعياً وعاطفياً في مجتمعه.
يوم كنت في الروضة معلمتي اكتشفت فيني موهبة الرسم، بعدها رمستها أهليها وقالت لهم ترى بنتكم موهوبة، اهتموا بموهبتها. اجتمعت ويا أمي وقاموا مبادرة تكتشفني، والحمد لله تم اختياري من الموهوبين. من هذاك اليوم للحين وأهلي يدخلون مبادرات ورشات ودورات عشان أقدر أنمي موهبتي فيها.
دور العائلة في تعليم الأبناء كبير. بالنسبة لنا أعتقد أن الجلوس مع الأبناء ومساعدتهم في الواجبات المدرسية فرصة للتفاعل ولنقل المهارات والقيم اللي تساعدهم في مستقبلهم وتعزز لهم انتمائهم للوطن.
If the parents and the teachers or the institution are on the same page with regard to expectations, with regard to what a child can do and how a child needs to be supported, it's all one. There's no difference between the home environment and the school environment. It's this joint engagement that really helps the child to thrive and to succeed in school.
توفير البيئة التعليمية المحفزة ليست واجب المدرسة فحسب، بل هي مسؤولية العائلة أيضاً كي يشعر الأبناء بالثقة ولنكون أول رفيق لهم في الخطوات الأولى نحو المستقبل.
هناك 3 أنواع من التأثيرات غير المباشرة حين يكون ولي الأمر جزء من التخطيط للتعليم. أولاً التطور والنضج العاطفي، يكون الطالب أكثر قدرة على إدارة عواطفه. النضج الآخر هو النضج الاجتماعي والقدرة على إدارة العلاقات الاجتماعية مع نفسه، مع أقرانه ومع المعلم. والنضج الأخير هو النضج المعرفي، ولا يمكن أن تظهر هذه الآثار إلا إن كانت العلاقة قوية بين المنزل والمدرسة، وبالتالي تكون الأدوار أكثر وضوحاً لجميع أطراف العملية التعليمية.
I first came to the UAE 2 years ago and I didn't know any English. With help of my teacher and my parents, now I know how to speak 3 languages: Arabic, English, and Korean. I do after-school activities. I play piano. I was spelling bee champion, and I all did that with support of my teacher and my parents.
Be interested in your child, be attentive to your child, care for your child's needs and your child's interests, and really try to be there to support the child in order to help the child thrive.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سمو الشيخ حامد بن زايد آل نهيان، سمو الشيوخ، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، الضيوف الكرام، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اسمحوا لي بداية بالتعريف عن نفسي. اسمي الدكتورة ميليث الطائي، مديرة كلية الإمارات للتطوير التربوي، ويشرفني اليوم أن أتولى مهمة إدارة هذا الحوار. يسرني الترحيب بكم اليوم في هذا المجلس الملهم الذي يعد منارة للفكر والحوار الخلاق الذي يثري معارفنا بالمواضيع المحورية التي تحتاج إلى حلول مبتكرة تدعم أهدافنا وطموحاتنا بغد أفضل. ستتناول محاضرة مجلسنا الكريم اليوم دور الوالدين في دعم أبنائهم خلال مراحل تعليمهم المختلفة، فقد بات من المهم جداً تعاون أولياء أمور الطلبة والتربويين وخلق مسارات جديدة لتعزيز التعاون بينهم لدعم العملية التعليمية داخل وخارج نطاق المدرسة. سيقوم ضيفنا اليوم البروفيسور والمؤلف والباحث الفنلندي دكتور باسي سالبيرغ، أستاذ القيادة التربوية بجامعة ملبورن، بتقديم محاضرة بعنوان الأسرة شريك في التعليم، وسيقوم من خلالها باستعراض رؤيته وأفكاره في هذا المجال. ونلفت عنايتكم إلى أن المحاضرة ستكون باللغة الإنجليزية، وبإمكانكم استخدام السماعات لمتابعة الترجمة الفورية. اسمحوا لي الآن بأن أتحدث باللغة الإنجليزية. Your Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be moderating today's session, which focuses on the pivotal role that parents play in supporting their children's educational journey throughout the different stages of their development. It is my privilege to introduce our distinguished guest, Professor Basi Saalberg, Professor of Educational Leadership at the University of Melbourne, who is an award-winning educator and dedicated researcher and has been a beacon of inspiration for educators worldwide. Dr. Saalberg will be delivering a lecture titled Parents as Partners in Education and sharing his insightful and profound perspectives within the realm of education.
Thank you so much. If you don't mind, I stand and speak, okay? Your Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me first begin by saying what a great honor it is to talk to you this afternoon. My first question really, if we go to the actual lecture, if you watch the video closely, would be that why do we need to have this conversation? Why is it important that we think about the role that parents play in our children's education? Some of the answers you saw in this video, and of course there's a lot of research that is showing that the closer the partnership between school and parents is, that the better the education outcomes are. During the next 28 minutes, I'm going to show you that there's actually much more than that we need to keep in mind when we are thinking about our children in general, and particularly when it comes to their school education. So the first thing is really, and this is a little bit like background to this conversation, and personally I do think as an education, I'm also a parent. I have children going to school currently, so I think about this also as a parent, is the question that, so how do our children today learn in a school compared to how many of the parents learned 20 or 30 years ago? This is a very important thing to think about, and there's a lot of research and data now available for that. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that goes back to this question, why this conversation is so important. So what you see here is I'm going to show you a 20-year trend in a couple of things that are important in our children's lives. The first one is, of course, the education outcomes. So basically, we can ask the question that how the children are learning now compared to what how they learned 20 years ago. Here you're going to see this curve that starts in the year 2000 for a certain reason, and you see that in the beginning it looked all good. The first few years of this century, the results were improving globally, so this is not about Abu Dhabi or Australia or Finland. This is a global trend. But then you see that at some point things started to go down. And today we are in a situation where students in general around the world are not learning as well as they did 20 years ago, or probably beyond that one. These red dots that you see here obviously are something that we don't know exactly yet. There's the pandemic has been there in the middle, and there are probably good reasons to believe that that 2 or 3 year break in a formal schooling has not done any good for students' outcomes. So this is the big picture of what we are talking about when we look at the learning outcomes of children. It's very difficult actually to find success stories around the world during the last 20 years when it comes to students' learning outcomes. Please keep in mind that this is a global picture. This is not about any particular country. So this is a kind of a trend that we are talking about. Why is it important to have parents and teachers collaborating more closely about the children's education? Part of the reason is exactly here, that we need to be able to turn this curve back. The second trend is about the students' well-being, and this is a big issue now around the world. Everybody's talking about that in Finland, Australia, United States, all across Europe. That if we look at our children's social and emotional well-being, the trend during the last 20 years looks exactly like this. This is the second reason why is it so important that we talk about our children's education, learning, and well-being collectively with the parents. Now, my question to you is that what do you think if you look at the time somewhere in 2010, 2012, where we see that both of these curves started to go down, what would be your kind of an immediate response? What happened? Why is this? What do you think? This one, okay? In 2012, around the world, it happened that about 50% of the young people, especially teenagers, they were carrying this device just like I do here on the stage right now. Today, the situation is different. It's practically everyone, including the primary school children. I get back to this question of why this thing that we have in our pockets may have something to do about these things that we need to care about. But this is if you don't actually need any other excuse for really taking this school and family partnership more seriously than this one. I'm going to show you another one as well. And this is something that we can see around the world. Again, this data is not about here. This is actually the situation in Australia where I work and live right now. So what you see here is these 2 dots. The blue one is a typical child going to school from a family that has a higher socioeconomic status. In other words, the parents are better educated and they have better income. This red dot there is a child who comes from the lower socioeconomic group. Often parents having less education and less power opposition in society. Now, what is interesting in this picture is that in the year 3 or grade 3 in Australia, it may be the same here, the gap between those 2 typical children coming from different equity groups or social groups equals about 2 years of schooling. Now, we have schools all around the world to equalize this gap as the kids when they travel through the school, right? So what you see here in the horizontal line, this is year level in school, means the journey that children do when they go from grade 3 to 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to show you what's going to happen during the 6 years of schooling in a typical school in Australia. And remember, this could be in many other countries as well. So this is what happens. The schooling actually currently is not able to equalize these differences that the kids have. It's actually making them much bigger. Again, this is another reason to take this more seriously and ask, why is this? And what the school and what the parents can do to make sure that we are able to do what the schools were supposed to do to equalize and narrow this gap, okay? So this is the question that comes from these data above. What influences students' learning in school? Not too often we actually ask these questions when we are working with when the parents and teachers are working together. But this is one of those questions we need to ask. What do we know about this? Why some children, as you saw there, learn more and better and faster than the others? This is one of those things that is probably more researched than any other aspect of schooling during the last 75 years. So we have a lot of research to establish a kind of answer to this question. Okay? I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we could spend the whole afternoon here talking about this, but I'm going to show you the solution here without any indication what this actually, what these factors or issues would be. You can see there are 4 different colors. One of them is a teacher, so teacher influence, how much a teacher explains the students' learning in school. The other one is all the other in-school factors, like a principal, curriculum, computers, textbooks, facilities that the school has. Then there's the other one is about all the out-of-school factors, family, mother's education, the community where the kids live, the kind of people they spend their life with, and so on. And then one of them is the unexplained variation, something that in research always happens, that we don't know exactly what it is. Now, my second question to you is that which of these colors do you think is a teacher? I hear all the colors and the rainbow. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Okay? Some people might say that, of course, it's a gray, because schools are so important. Some people may say, but they're not so important. There's other things that are probably more important. Maybe it's this yellowish color, but I'm going to show you what it is. Teacher is this blue color over there, and this is not just one study. This is all the studies. I went through a massive amount of literature and tried to establish a kind of a consensus on what explains what kids learn in the school. And it's about 10 to 15% of the variation can be associated to teacher. This whole school, if you take this orange over there, it's about 20%, no more than 25%. But remember that this unexplained variation can add to any of these things. But my point here in this figure is this gray area, which is all those things that are beyond the reach of schools, teachers, or principals. It's people like you, parents, the community, and the kind of people that your children or my children spend time with. This is something that we need to keep very closely in this conversation about what school can do and what the role of the parents. Now, if you want to have any research evidence, it's right here, that during the last 50 years, as I said, there's a lot of research, but what we do know, that the family background is often much more important factor explaining what the kids learn in the school or what they don't learn in the school than people normally think. Okay? There are those who disagree with this. There are those who have done studies that show it's a little bit different, but this still remains a question that is widely agreed among the scholars. All right. So what we're seeing now, if I take this story a little bit further, is that there's an interesting change happening in the world, especially during this time that you saw in the beginning. That in the 20th century, all the way until about year 2000, this is where the learning took place. The school was the place where everybody had to go if you wanted to become something, if you wanted to go to university or learn knowledge and skills that you need in life, you went to school, right? That's what I did, and that's what all of you did. And as you can see here, the home has an important role, community, technology, TV, radio, cinema, all those things in the 20th century. And the peers, of course. And now the change that is happening, and this has everything to do with this partnership, how we talk about children's education, is this. Then this is the 21st century picture, and it looks similar, but there's one shift there, and it's the place that technology is now taking away from school, that basically children can learn anything they need in life through technology. You don't need to go to school that much anymore. Of course you need to do that, but in principle, somebody can learn everything he or she needs through these personal gadgets or technology somewhere else. So, this brings a lot of opportunities, but it also brings a lot of risks that we have to be aware of. One of them is that we often assume that now when technology is in everybody's pocket, and everybody has access to YouTube and learning materials and different curricula around the world, we are able to narrow this gap that you saw there earlier. But look at this. This comes from our research in Australia during the last 5 years, where we actually argue that at the same time when kids have more access to technology and more access to resources and learning, there's a risk that these inequities and gaps are just getting wider. We often use the term the new digital divide. The old digital divide was about having this access or not having that. Now we have closed that gap. Everybody has access to technology and internet and all these resources there. But this new digital divide is coming from the fact that parents and families often have very different ways and opportunities to help their children to navigate in this digital world that is full of risks and dangers that you need to be aware of. Our research in Australia, called Growing Up Digital Australia, shows that 30%, about 1/3 of Australian parents, every night let their children go to bed, go to sleep with their own gadget. 1/3. I don't know what it is here. It would be interesting to know what the picture is here. But if we look at the families, the parents coming from the lower income brackets in Australia, it's almost half. So almost half of the lower income families and parents let their children sleep with their gadgets and devices. And take a look at this, 60%, 3 in 5 children, according to our study, who are struggling in a school go to bed with their device. What does it mean? It means that this device and technology has something to do with the children's education, what they learn in the school, and it may also have a lot to do with their well-being, this declining trend that you saw there. So what we also learned from our study and research, and many others have done that during the last 10 years really, is that, and what we hear educators and parents telling us back home in Australia, is that both parenting and teaching in a school have become much more complicated and complex than they used to be. Very interesting thing. For example, back home, about 60% of our teachers in our schools in Australia say that when they look at the kids, and this was before pandemic, just before the pandemic came around, that teachers observed a decline in students' readiness to learn. Readiness to learn, what does it mean? It means that the kids they didn't sleep well, they cannot concentrate or focus anymore on things, they have to check their devices all the time, and many other things. This is what we hear from educators. At the same time, 75%, 3 in 4 parents are saying that being a parent actually is much more complicated and hard as soon as the kids get their own device. Have you seen that in your family? Probably yes, because this is around the world. How do you make sure that you can provide help and education and support to your kid or child who is not able to make control out of these things herself? So, what are we going to see in the future? And this is one part of this narrative and conversation that parents and educators, teachers will have and actually must have. What the future will look like. How do we think about the future of schooling in this space where we see that the learning trend is going down and well-being, the students' well-being is going down, and many other things. One of those things that I can see emerging, and many other scholars as well, is the thing that we call whole child approach. Something that would go beyond looking at children as those who are just going to school or learning because of the academic things. Of course, the academic things, reading and writing and mathematics and science, are extremely important. I used to teach mathematics and science many years in Finland, and I think so. I think is an important thing. But within this whole child movement of thinking, we are seeing that the children are much more than that. We need to think about their well-being, their character, their physical and artistic talent. Remember this in this video, beautiful video, you saw this little girl who was saying that the teacher in the school realized my talent. This is exactly what this whole child approach means. Values and personality and many other things are a very important part of this kind of a future way of looking at who children are and what the school should be doing. If I'm not mistaken, I understand that you have the Zayed educational project here that is trying to do exactly this, opening new campuses and complexes in the country where this whole child approach is the one that will be driving the future education. Exactly the right way to go. This is taking place in the United States, North America, Canada, Finland, is the whole country is doing this already. And it's becoming a trend also in Australia. I strongly believe that this is the conversation that we parents and educators need to have. But there's another dimension there. This whole child is about the individual children. How do we see them? How do we think about their future and education in the school? But then there's a whole question of what will the future school look like? And if we put together this whole child with the new idea of the school that is trying to do these things, trying to educate whole child rather than trying to educate a narrow knowledge and skills of children, then we need to have something that we often call a full-service school or holistic school that is doing more than just making sure that children learn academic things that are very important, remember. But this full-service school is having a strong focus on health and well-being, including dental health, counseling, recreation, social support, and deeper learning. So why I'm showing you this? I'm showing you this because, this should be or could be a very important part of this conversation that parents and schools have. We should not only talk about what is happening now. Of course, that's probably the most important thing, but we also need to have these conversations with parents and educators, what will be, what the future will look like. Nobody knows what it is, so that's why these are the very, very interesting, important conversations. So I have 3 conclusions for you of all of this thing that I see very optimistic way and very kind of a hopeful, in the sense that now we have an opportunity to do something that will change education. There are many of those who think that too long we have had schools and education just like it's always been. The pandemic has given us this opportunity to kind of reset some of these ideas that we have and provided us with the invitation to reimagine, rethink what the school could be. This is my first conclusion here. Remember, we have parents and teachers and this child here in a situation where everybody needs one another. So what we learned in our research is that, in Australia, is that about half of the parents, when they think about this digital well-being or digital wellness of their children, and by the way, this is number one concern now around the world. In North America, in Europe, in Australia, the children's declining mental health that is often caused by these devices is number one issue. And that's why it's right what the parents are saying, that they would like to see that the parents and schools share the responsibility to helping children grow up healthy, happy, and responsible in a digital world. This is not about taking these devices away or turning them off. This is about learning to live with this technology. Okay? So this is a good news, but it gets even better when we look at the teachers. Again, in our study, and I guess that this would be very similar here or in other places, is that the half of the teachers say that it would be great if parents would do a little bit more in helping their children to understand this technology and learn to use it more safely and responsibly. Really huge opportunity back home, and I guess in many other places as well, for parents and teachers to get together with the child and think about how do we go from here. So this is my first conclusion. The second one, if you read this carefully, you probably remember that it was John F. Kennedy in his presidential address in the US Congress in January 1961, when he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And when I was thinking about this, and how beautiful this is, if we just switch it a little bit and give this to parents to think about when they see their school, where their children go, and think about what is the school like. Because too often, and I'm not talking about schools here, I've been in many schools here in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and other parts of the UAE, but I'm talking about schools back home in Australia and many other countries, that schools are becoming more and more like service providers, and parents are seen as clients, customers. Somebody says that, what's wrong with that? Well, it changes the whole partnership idea. Like, you know, if you go and buy yourself a new car, you don't think much about what your neighbor is buying or how happy or unhappy he or she is with the car. You think about your own thing, right? As soon as you get the good service and good product for yourself, you're happy, okay? And this is exactly what is happening in many parts of the world when it comes to education. What this wisdom that I borrowed from JFK is trying to say is that that's not enough. That we also need to think about other people's children's education, the community. And if we are able to do that, then of course, it means that the whole partnership with the school and the parents need to be different. When you go to the meeting in your school with your child, it means that we also are interested in what is happening in other families and other children, not just our own. So this is my second conclusion. And then the third one is probably my favorite thing of all. It comes to this issue of trust. The book that I wrote a couple of years ago called In Teachers We Trust, we kind of conclude the whole story of trust building within education system and within schools and communities by saying that schools improve at the speed of trust, meaning that more trust there is between the community and school, or parents and the teachers, or the children and their teachers, the faster the improvement in the school will be. So what does it mean? Well, we all know that the trust doesn't come just like that. It doesn't come through a lecture or address. It comes through deeds and work that we do to build these relationships in the school that can then create trust. Now, the problem we often have, and again, I'm not exactly sure how the schools are organized here in Abu Dhabi, but in many countries, again, like in Australia, it's very common that if you have a grade 4 teacher, this teacher is teaching grade 4 every year. You see what I mean? That every year you get this new grade 4, and then you pass it to somebody who is teaching grade 5 and grade 6. Now, I'm asking, why are we doing it like this? Why don't we use the same principle that we use with a dentist? How many of you change your child's dentist every year? Nobody. If you find a good dentist, you're going to keep the good dentist year after year after year, right? At least we do. So in the school, we have this funny system that the kids are having a new teacher every year, which makes many things more complicated, including building these relationships. And with the relationships comes trust. So that's why if we want to improve schools in a sustainable way, anywhere, we need to understand that building trust is important. Remember, schools improve at the speed of trust. So overall, I think there are many reasons to ask for more or different partnership between schools and teachers. Technology is just one part of that, but it is an important part. And I do not believe that we are able to significantly turn these curves upward that you saw in the beginning without addressing the digital well-being and wellness of people, and we can only do that by bringing adults, the parents and teachers and children into this conversation. With this, I say shukran, thank you very much, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Saalberg, for the insightful presentation. I'd like to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
You talked about the importance of out-of-school factors and how they significantly increase student outcomes. What joint strategies can teachers and parents work on together to establish this out-of-school, collaboration?
Okay, let me ask you first, the audience there, how many of you found it surprising that out-of-school factors are so significant? Can you put your hand up if you think that it was a big one? Most people do, so you're not alone. We often think that, of course, the teacher and the school are the most important things. But I think, your question about what does it mean in practice, if this is true, and of course, what you saw there is not a truth about single school. We have single schools that are able to do miracles and differences. This is about a massive amount of millions and millions of children. But if we want to address this in practice, I think the first thing we need to do is that we need to have a culture and this organization in the school that will make sure that we know these children as well as we can. And when I say we, I mean teachers and educators. So we need to ask things like, is our school now organized in a way that will make sure that teachers will learn to understand the children, and that they learn to know the parents, and that they are able to identify those individual needs and things that the school can do to overcome this horrible situation that we have now, that these learning gaps are just getting wider. Unless we are able to do that, if we don't have a school where teachers would be able to learn to understand these individual children enough, it's going to be very, very difficult. But then the other one is that I think, if educators and parents, if they take this to heart, what I was showing here, and if they really understand that school alone cannot change the world, that it takes the village, it takes the whole community to help children, it's going to be difficult. I wouldn't advise any parent to have this attitude that it's your job to teach my child, and I just want to see the results and outcomes. Just like JFK said, I would take this also to heart, that ask not what your school can do for you, ask what you can do for the school and the community. That would be the best way to go. But this kind of a research fact that I showed you there, that's the starting point for these conversations.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, you also talked about the decline of well-being across students. What can parents and teachers do together to elevate from this gap when it comes to well-being and across children?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And again, I don't know what the audience kind of opinion or experience of this is, but around the world, this well-being is becoming a really burning issue. When I ask you to think about why this well-being has been declining globally, many of you say that it's about the technology and iPads and the smartphones, and probably the fasting and the most effective way to really address this well-being thing in our schools would be to take this, what we call digital well-being or digital wellness. That is a positive term in a sense that it doesn't include the idea that we kind of forcefully take the technology away from kids, but it includes the idea that we learn to live with the technology and these devices. And it's an equally big issue among us. This is what we learned in Australia with the study, is that it's not children who are suffering from the declining digital well-being. It's also with parents and adults, everyone. So a positive approach to this, and probably most effective, would be to address these digital habits that we often don't talk about when it comes to our children and parents and adults, and try to change the way we live and work and learn in this digital world. Unfortunately, not too many places are yet doing that, because one reason is that we don't have solid research evidence that it's actually the decline of well-being would be because of the technology. Most likely it will be, but the evidence is not there. But if you ask me one thing that schools could do with the parents, I would definitely give this one. That let's see, how this digital lifestyle is affecting our lives as parents, our children's lives and schools, and then do something about it.
Which really leads me to the next question, Professor Saalberg. We talk about student agency and student voice. So we talked about parents, we talked about teachers. What do we know about what students expect about education or from education?
Yeah, we have a lot of anecdotal evidence, of course, from different surveys and listening to parents and teachers' stories. But I think, and there's of course a lot of research about this as well. Some of these studies they indicate that what young people want, depending on the age a little bit, whether we talk about early childhood or primary or high school students, but a kind of a common thing that I can see in many studies is that young people, children, would expect that we adults would take them seriously, that we would listen to their views and what they want to do. My own view is that young people, even young children, they have much more capabilities and capacities to do good things that we give them credit for. We often treat them like they don't know anything and we have to kind of give everything ready. This is not what the kids are saying. The other thing that we have seen in a number of studies actually now, what the young people are telling as adults is that we want to be part of the solution to this declining world when it comes to environment or well-being and technology and many other things. That young people see that they want to be part of this effort to do good things in the world. So I think that those are some of these. It goes at the heart of this student, what we call student voice and student agency. I think the next step in this would be school level. If you look at this future school, this full service school idea, that I think that we're going to see in the future more schools that will actually go from student agency to student leadership. That we give students, especially older students, much more responsibilities in the schools to influence their own learning. Of course, with the guidance and support from wise and smart adults. But I think we need to think very carefully about the role of children as well. The topic of this talk here has been about parents and schools, but I would strongly encourage people to also think about how much the children's voice and children could be helpful in these conversations when they think about how to turn these things around.
Indeed, Professor. You talked about the students and the importance of students' voice. How can parents and schools work together to increase students' voice and to personalize the education experience for the students?
Yeah, Dr. May, it's a great question, and I think one thing we need to keep in mind is that children benefit from homes, families, and school having a similar aligned principles, particularly with this issue. I know that some parents may have different views about how much freedom or trust or responsibilities or voice or agency they give the old children, and this should be like that we cannot assume that any authority or anybody outside of the home should tell you how to raise your kids. That's your job, how you do that. School is a different place, but I think that unless we have a little bit more coherence between these two things, what the children experience when they are with you at home and when they are in the school, especially regarding this agency and voice thing, I think it's going to be difficult to get things done. So again, it goes back to the heart of the topic of this lecture, is that the parents' role and the school's role should be to have more conversation about this. What is the good and kind of a fruitful and respectful way to make sure that young people, the children, realize that I have a voice, I can do these things without breaking this rule that in the end of the day it's the parents who are having the last say about what should be done at home.
Professor Saalberg, you talked about home, you talked about schools, and the importance of blurring the lines, really, between what happens at school and at home. How can schools and parents work together to ensure that education is continuous and really an integrated experience for the child?
Yeah, you know, again, one of my conclusions there in the end was about trying to make sure that we understand our perception, how parents see the school and how school teachers see the family and the community. Again, you know, if we have a different views about, if the parents, for example, have a very strong view that school is it's a merchant and I'm a client and I purchase educational services, it's a very difficult to build a kind of a coherent way of having a conversation with the school if the school is having a very different view about educating young people. So I think, as we saw in the video, that it's very important to build these relationships between the families and schools, but within these relationships and conversations that we have between homes and schools, that we need to also make sure that we at least understand how we see these things differently before things get bad. And I've seen schools and situations where there are really big conflicts between parents and the school, often because of these expectations are so different. And there's nothing worse from the children's point of view than adults having arguments or fights about what to do. So that's why these conversations are so important. Make sure that we understand one another's views, have these conversations about child, but also the future of education, the future of schooling, that will eventually lead in better understanding about what teaching and learning are all about.
Thank you, Professor Saalberg. Last question. I'd like to talk about the digital divide that you were talking about. And how can we know that there are challenges of having equitable access to educational resources and opportunities? How can schools and parents collaborate to bridge this digital divide?
This is this $10 million question that we are talking about before. Again, I think it's very important to avoid this myth or trap that now when everybody has access, all the children, including primary school children, have their own devices in their pockets or bags, that's where the equality or equity begins. This research that you saw there is a unique in the sense that it hasn't been done in that way. So we haven't been actually aware before these studies that having the equality of access to technology can actually create new inequities when it comes to digital wellness. Mm-hmm. So, one thing that parents and schools can do is to, for example, have the conversation about this, what digital well-being is all about. How does it link to overall emotional or social health of young people, and build these conversations, and then the work that the schools and parents are doing around this digital wellness. Otherwise, it's going to probably stay very abstract and difficult to turn into practices. I love this idea of digital wellness because it's a positive thing. It's something that I just need to train and practice myself, my own skills, within the family or in the school, to make sure that we are better with these devices and technology than without it. But it doesn't, again, my first conclusion there showed you what the teachers and parents are expecting. That's what my favorite outcome in this research was, exactly this, that they both teachers and parents in Australia, and probably here as well, are expecting exactly the same things, that they want the other side or the other partner to join in this campaign to help these young people to learn how to navigate in these dangers of digital world. So I would probably start from there, and that would probably then lead also to many other conversations afterwards. But this is a concrete thing. I didn't ask you here. I could have done that actually. That how many of you think that you have problems with your own digital habits? many of us, we don't want to admit those things. I know exactly what to do. But then when I look at people, they often go and check is there any messages there? You do it like in every 3 minutes or so. So if you do that, then I think we need to have a conversation with our kids as well. Listen, as a father, I have the same issue. And so how do you think we can actually go about this? And these are very interesting conversations when you sit with your daughter or your son and talk about things that are concerning you as much as your child. So I wish you good luck with that, because it's a very important, our children's well-being and health and future is actually at stake when we talk about those things.
Thank you, Professor Saalberg, for the rich and insightful discussion. في الختام تناولت محاضرة اليوم أهمية دمج أولويات الأسرة وفهم احتياجاتهم لتعزيز تقدم أبنائها في عملية التعليم، واستحداث مسارات حديثة لتعزيز التعاون بين الوالدين والمعلمين لدعم احتياجات الطلبة وتطوير عملية التعليم واستشراف مستقبله، بما ينعكس على مخرجات التعليم والتحصيل العلمي لدى أبنائنا الطلاب. أتقدم بالشكر الجزيل إلى البروفيسور باسي سالبيرغ على محاضرته القيمة والرد على الأسئلة المطروحة، وأشكر أيضاً الحضور الكريم على حسن استماعهم. في الختام أود أن أدعو سمو الشيخ حامد بن زايد آل نهيان والمشاركين في فقرة الفيديو لأخذ صورة جماعية، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.